I think I'll take this. Is this going to be in your way?
All right, I can get us started, I guess. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for eating our pizza, because if you didn't, then I would. I'm Brandon Latham. I'm the events director for the Environmental Law Society, along with Haley. Round of applause for Haley. This is our first event of the semester. We decided last semester to talk with some of our classmates about what people wanted to see in our programming, and everybody, particularly those of us who are not from New Hampshire, was curious about what's going on the ground here in terms of legal issues that we're learning about in class, but also just what's happening around us every day, particularly the outdoor bent that that draws a lot of our classmates to New Hampshire in the first place. So we decided to put this together for our first event of the semester as a legislative overview panel and just sort of hit the ground running and cast a wide net on these issues here in New Hampshire. So without wasting any more time, we can just let everybody introduce yourselves, a couple of minutes about what you do. Let's start with Nick.
All right, thanks. Yeah, my name is Nick Krakoff. I'm a staff attorney with the Conservation Law Foundation here in Concord. So a lot of what I do is I practice before the Public Utilities Commission here in Concord. So, we do a lot of cases involving natural gas distribution systems, energy efficiency, grid modernization. Excuse me. Outside of New Hampshire, I also do some work on offshore wind. Basically, with the federal regulatory process there, and then I do a lot of work on transmission matters in New England in general. So with ISO New England, which is the grid operator in New England, kind of ways to improve the transmission system and sort of develop a transmission system that accounts for renewable energy and accounts for the transition to a clean electrification and a clean energy economy. But yeah, I guess that's what I do in a nutshell. That's over to Sam.
I'm Sam Evans-Brown. I'm the Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire, which is a small policy nonprofit. And we also work at the Public Utilities Commission alongside the Conservation Law Foundation. But then also, I'm a registered lobbyist, so we also work at the legislature. Prior to being in this role, I was a journalist, so when I had to register as a lobbyist and was given the pin, it burned my skin when I touched it, but I'm getting over it slowly. But Clean Energy New Hampshire, we're a nonprofit, and we have individual members and business members, all of whom are engaged in pushing for good energy policy here locally. We do not work at ISO New England. We focus exclusively on New Hampshire policy, so legislature and Public Utilities Commission.
And really quickly, I heard one of you, I can't remember who, when Sam came in, said, I thought you looked familiar. He sounded familiar to some of us. He was at Hampshire Public Radio and ran a really, really exceptional podcast for a while.
I was a public radio journalist for 10 years.
Covering energy.
Covering energy.
One of the first times I met him before I was a state rep, and he was in my committee hearing yesterday.
Very versatile.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Representative Kat McGhee, and I live in Hollis, and I serve on Science, Technology, and Energy. I'm the deputy ranking member in the minority, and I'm also a member of the Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Board, which is called the EASY Board, and we work on energy efficiency issues for the state. It's a stakeholder group basically, and I was appointed by the speaker to that committee. And I also have been involved over at the Public Utilities Commission, because in my first term as a state rep, I was asked to chair a subcommittee on a Senate bill that had come over to Science, Technology, and Energy on a statewide energy data platform. And that was basically a very innovative project, and my background is as a software project manager, program manager basically. And so I was able to take that project all the way through and get it through the House. They didn't expect it to pass through the House. But when I saw it and recognized what it was, I thought it was a really great idea for us to sort of get ahead of the data curve and being able to understand and manage, what we have here. So we underwent a 15-month process and had a hearing in May in front of the Public Utilities Commissioners at the time to try and push that forward, at least just for an RFP, to try and figure out what it would all cost. But by the time we had completed our 15 months during COVID, we had an entire set of use cases for all of the users of that tool. So the project's in a very good place, and we're hoping that that's going to go forward. So that's just a little bit. I mean, when you're a state rep, and Howard can attest to this, your job is whatever you make it. You know, you can really go in a lot of different directions. And that project just sort of had my name written on it, because there are not a lot of people that have technology or software background that are serving in the State House. So I kind of, you know, glommed onto it and became an intervener. But anyway, so that's just part of that. And I know that when I first spoke to Brendan, he was saying that folks might be interested in sort of what's happening with energy policy. So that's really why I'm here tonight.
And I might have missed it, but did you mention where you represent?
I did, yeah, Hollis, yeah.
Well, good evening. My name is Representative Howard Pearl. I actually live in Loudon, but I represent a flotarial district which covers 5 towns of Loudon, Boscawen, Northfield, Canterbury, and part of the city of Franklin. I'm really only here for the pizza, which was good, by the way. Thank you. So I serve as the chair of the Environment and Agricultural Committee. So I'm in my 3rd term as a state rep. I'm a full-time farmer by trade, so I was quite familiar with the agricultural side of the policy making of our committee. The environmental side, I had some background in it, but learning the solid waste issues have become a real problem in New Hampshire, and they've certainly come to the forefront of much of the legislation that we've received in the last 2 years, especially this year. And so I've been learning a lot really fast, sort of drinking from a fire hose. So you're all familiar with that, I'm sure, with the information you receive as law students, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming. But we have really great people in New Hampshire, and everybody's sort of pulling in the same direction, trying to understand and how to deal with solid waste. It's an issue that we have to address, and certainly that has become a big one. I am appointed to the Solid Waste Working Group. I'm the representative for the New Hampshire House, and what our task is to help advise the Department of Environmental Services on setting up our long-range solid waste plan. So it's an important task, because, as I said, it's something we've got to deal with. We will run out of landfill space at some point, and so we have to be looking at the public policy as how that affects of what goes into our landfills, what we accept. So recycling is one big one that we're always looking at. Composting is another. We've done some legislative work on. Those are kind of the major things that we're focusing on right now on the environmental side. On the agricultural side, we tend to deal a lot with, again, farm policy. That's kind of relatively settled most of the time. We occasionally get some concern around GMOs, bees, things of that nature. We'll get some bills related to that. A lot of animal cruelty bills come through our committee. Those are very challenging, because many people view their pets as a member of their family, and understandably so. So there's a lot of emotion related to those issues. By statute, animals and pets are considered property. And so when you get into dealing with that whole aspect of you've got someone's property and you're starting to seize it, it's not, I always say to people, it's not a bag of marijuana you can stick on the shelf, and 8 months from now when the trial comes up, you're all set, you pull it back off, and there's your evidence. Very different with a live being like an animal, and taking care of that. So there's a lot of challenges that come with dealing with animal cruelty legislation. But I don't need to yammer on too long about that. That's kind of the essence of what we do and who I am. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's John Swan. I'm the founder of Save Forest Lake. I don't know if you've heard of our group, but our website's SaveForestLake.com. We're in year 3 now of a fight to stop an unnecessary and unwanted landfill in the North Country. The 180-acre landfill that will be multi-generational, because the solid waste company from Rutland, Vermont, has 1,900 acres of land under contract, and the initial footprint is about 2,800 feet from Forest Lake, a body of water that's very popular. There's about 150 homes surrounding it, and it's about 1 mile upstream or upland of the Ammonoosuc River. So the surrounding property is primarily made up of wetlands, which drain into the Ammonoosuc River, which then flows to the town of Littleton, heart of the North Country tourism industry. So it's just a terrible location for a landfill. The only problem is this waste company's got a lot of money. They see green in terms of dollars, and they found a willing landowner willing to sell, and a town with no zoning. So in the course of this 3-year fight, one of the first things I did when I learned about this, of course, was like, who would do such a thing, first of all? Because just look at the nuisance of a landfill right next to a state park, and Forest Lake is in a state park. But at the same time, I had to look for a solution, because of course, it's like, we can't just allow this to happen. And I did go to the select board in our town, and I asked, what can we do to stop this? And the response was, nothing, we don't have zoning. So, being brand new to this kind of fight, all my friends growing up would laugh if they heard I was an environmental activist now, but I was directed to the RSAs, to the state statutes, and RSA 674, 24 to 29 consists of emergency temporary zoning for a town in New Hampshire that does not have zoning. And I learned that I had to pass a petition, get signatures, and so obviously it started out as an army of one. I had actually friends in the area who were against it, but they said, this just isn't the right time for zoning in Dalton, because they tried in the past and they all live free or die, no zoning. Well, what are you going to do? So I passed the petition. We got over 110 signatures in a town of 1,000,
Yeah.
and presented to the board. That was in April, May. By July 23rd, we had the public hearing for zoning. Casella, the company, lobbied very hard against it. They said emergency zoning would not stop their project. You can read about the Bethlehem case law, et cetera, about state preemption and zoning. But they had 4 barbecues in Dalton. They sent mailers. But on July 30th, 2019, passed zoning. So since then, it's just been you read every day, because I'm one of the leaders of this fight. You read state law, you read whatever information you can on social media. You just kind of build up your followers, and the main goal was raising awareness. So the one thing I wanted to share with you is the fact that I was sued after the first year of my fight by Casella for defamation. So 3/4 of that has been tossed out in court, and as of today, my attorney's getting ready to file a motion for summary judgment. But we're going to win, because I back up everything I speak about, and you're allowed to have an opinion in this country. But one thing in New Hampshire that we don't have is anti-slap legislation. So some of you out there, I would recommend you take a look at how you change that in New Hampshire. So, but thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We were talking the other day about how one of the trickier things about having a panel like this is knowing where to start. And then this week turned into a series of happy accidents. I think Nick knows what I'm talking about now. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your energy efficiency filing with the state Supreme Court?
Sure.
What you can tell us anyway.
Yeah, I mean, most of it's public now. So, basically a couple months ago, the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission issued this horrible decision on energy efficiency in New Hampshire. And, energy efficiency, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a way basically to reduce the amount of energy you use. And so by reducing the amount of energy you use, you save. You save because you're spending a lot less on energy. There's various measures that are, energy efficiency programs to like weatherization of windows and insulation, efficient light bulbs, whatnot. They really help families and residents in New Hampshire by allowing you to save on your energy bills, spend less on energy, and it's good for the environment too because you're consuming less energy and you're using less polluting sources of energy. And so about 5 years ago, the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission, they basically set up this framework that would govern energy efficiency. At that time they said, we're going to devise this framework to try to get as much energy efficiency as we can in the state of New Hampshire. And it was a fairly far-reaching decision at the time. Put us in line with our neighboring states that have adopted similar frameworks. And then, in November, the commission just decided to basically reverse that framework without any warning to any of the parties. So CLF was a party, CNH was a party. The New Hampshire utilities, didn't give any warning whatsoever that they were going to just, reverse this program that had existed for a number of years. So it raised a whole host of due process issues. So there were some other appeals filed, last week and a couple weeks ago, and then on Monday, Conservation Law Foundation, joined by Clean Energy New Hampshire, we filed a separate appeal challenging this decision to the Supreme Court of New Hampshire. So, there's a number of reasons why we're challenging the decision. Number one is there's this due process issue. There was no sort of notice that they were going to sort of reverse this framework that they established long ago. Number two, that it doesn't follow the statutory, the statutes in place for energy efficiency in New Hampshire. And then third, that it was just an arbitrary and unreasonable decision. So it's got a lot of attention. Most of the parties in the proceeding before the commission have appealed. Where the New Hampshire utilities, which tend to be, less, pro-environmental issues and pro-energy efficiency, where they have their own appeal, there's a pretty good chance that the Supreme Court will take this appeal because it's a discretionary appeal, and then, so in the next couple months they'll be making that decision, and then, if they decide to accept the appeal, there'll be a briefing schedule set. But the main thing is that they issued this, a legal order basically that had no basis in the law and just gave no warning to the parties that sort of this very framework of energy efficiency was going to be an issue.
You have anything to add, Sam?
I was gonna say, like, we were holding hands. Our organizations were holding hands and filing this thing. So that maybe to just like pull the camera back a little bit. The decision that the PUC issued on November 12th, I think, is really indicative of just a general neglect by the executive branch of the energy issue writ large. And so to give a couple examples of this, 2014, the state issued a state energy strategy. They have a 10-year energy strategy that they're supposed to put together. Very comprehensive document, hired consultants, hundreds of pages. 2018, they issued an update to it. It was like 18 pages long, very light on details, didn't really say much of anything. The one thing that it did say was it highlighted the energy efficiency resource standard, which is the policy that was overturned in this decision, and said, that's great, we should go ahead with that. But generally speaking, that we've seen a lot of that level of engagement with energy issues from the current administration. And also, I would say the appointments that we've been seeing into energy positions have been folks who don't have a ton of background in energy issues. And really that culminated with this November 12th decision where it was, I'm new to this area. I was a reporter, but reading it, I was like, this seems really amateurish to me, and I'm not even a lawyer. And in then the weeks that followed, in which we were determining what our organization was going to do to respond, I got to sit in on lots of calls with lots of lawyers and pretend I was a lawyer and learn lots of legal words. And my takeaway was like, yeah, this is an incredibly amateurish order that's really indicative of just kind of appointing the wrong folks. And so my hope is that the attention that decision has brought to the issue of energy efficiency has sort of shaken the administration up a little bit and made them think, hey, you know, if we don't pay attention to this issue, we're going to wind up with egg on our face. The benefit, I will say, is that we have, you know, the compromise legislation that has been put forward that's kind of, you know, I called it like the Band-Aid. We've got a legislative fix and a legal fix that are advancing at the same time. And the governor has signed on in support of the legislative fix. So, you know, the progress happens in New Hampshire slowly, and sometimes there are steps back after steps forward. This is certainly a step back, and I think for those who, if energy efficiency is something that you're passionate about, there are a lot of folks who you know, study the energy issue, and they say, oh, you know, energy efficiency really is the first thing we ought to do. So low-hanging fruit. It'll be a number of years before we sort of put the ship right in terms of New Hampshire's energy policy on getting forward progress again. Yeah.
I can kind of tie it up in a bow if you like, from the legislative perspective. Just on background, the EASY board is the board that fathered the committee that actually worked for a year and a half to pull together the 3-year energy plan that was under consideration by the PUC that was struck down. And so the decision was not in any way, as Sam alluded to, it was not in any way related to what was presented to them, because the folks who were on that stakeholder committee followed the law and followed what was to be presented. We have something that was defined back those 5 years ago when we started on this journey as the Granite State test, saying that any energy efficiency dollars that you spend have to have a return on investment that can be quantified. And so they hired an economist. They did everything they were supposed to do. And so what's really unfortunate is that the public often doesn't have any idea whether a process has been legitimate, whether all the rules have been followed. And so when someone just comes out and says, we don't like it, we don't want to spend any money, it's a pandemic, or whatever smokescreen they throw up, it's very hard to argue to people that this was done appropriately. And I think that's where the outrage and that's where the lawsuits are coming from. Is we did have a new commissioner appointed who had no background in energy rate setting or any of the skills that you actually need to be a public utilities commissioner. So, and then the commissioner who was the head commissioner at the time who signed off on it quit the day that she signed the order. So all of it was very unusual for the state of New Hampshire. And then the final thing I'll say is that we did have a vehicle that was a very unpopular bill on my committee around energy efficiency and really limiting how much you could add, basically determining how much money could be set and lowering that limit from the any ambition that we had around increasing our ability to do energy efficiency in a meaningful way. And so most of the people on my committee and on my side of the house, were not really in favor of that bill. But we got word from the Senate that they wanted to use that vehicle in order to stop the bleeding and turn the money back on for the New Hampshire Saves program, which is all the weatherization companies who were losing jobs and because of this crazy decision. So I got to speak on it on the floor, and it was really the Democrats that had to be convinced to vote for it because they were told it was not a good bill. And we got a 343-0 vote. So it was the first unanimous vote in the House since I've been there. So it was really cool, and that actually passed through the Senate. And this often happens in the legislature, is once everybody understands, oh, we screwed up and people figured it out and we need to fix it, everything moves really fast. So we got a unanimous vote last Thursday in the Senate, and it's coming back to the House, and it's on rails there too. So it'll be on the governor's desk shortly, and those spigots will be turned back on. So at least initially to the 2020 levels of funding, the money will be reinstated. So that's that.
So what happens next?
The House has to concur with the Senate language.
And we will.
And then the governor has to sign it, which I'm no parliamentarian, but I believe we're talking late February, early March.
Yeah, early March.
Early March. But I will say the programs, the utilities have already opened the programs back up. So for all through December, if you went to NewHampshireSaves.com, there was just a notice there that was like, no programs. and now they have the utilities have, I think, enough assurance that they will not overspend their budgets.
Right.
That they were willing to say, okay, we'll open it even before the bill is signed. And I think they also know that this bill's going to get signed. So, you know, we're starting to put the house of cards back up.
So it was like the Red Queen effect, you know, we ran as fast as we could and we ended up in the same place.
Yeah.
So I would like to add just a little.
Please.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the interesting things about being a legislator is what you hear in the news a lot is that everything is partisan. That, you know, all the bills, we're always on. Kat and I are from different parties, which is fine. We've worked together on bills before, and,
Yep.
and we often do. You'd be surprised at how much we come together on many occasions. More than 80% of the bills that go through the New Hampshire House do so with nonpartisan vote, where everybody's coming together, or bipartisan, I should say. You don't hear that in the news. What you hear about the legislature is we're always fighting, and we're always, you know, taking different stands on bills. Well, we do. There's 400 of us in the New Hampshire House. That's 400 different opinions on every topic that's out there. And sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but I think the really good part of being in the New Hampshire House and how it serves the New Hampshire citizens is the fact that you have representation like no other state does. Basically, every 3,400 of you, there's a one of us reps. And so, you know, there's at least one in every community, sometimes 2 or 3, and we're around. You have great access to your government, like many other states do not. And that part of it is very cool. And she's talking, I believe it's House Bill 529 you were referring to. Is that?
49, but.
549,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
You
Yes.
were on it.
Yeah, and you know, it's a good bill. It did go through unanimous. That's the only unanimous vote in recent history on a roll call vote. Like, I don't know, it's been a really long time. I was talking to the clerk today. He was not aware of another one in
Right.
the last 50 years. That we get a unanimous vote. There's always somebody that votes no. But this-
When we voice vote to adjourn, it's not unanimous.
But this bill went through with a unanimous vote. It was very cool to see.
That was neat.
So I guess the point I just want to wrap up is we do work together for the benefit of the state. The legislative process is meant to be slow and tedious and arduous and is duplicative in the sense that you do it all through the House and then you get all that done, and as John has found out on some bills, you get this all done and then you got to go do it all over again in the Senate. But there's a real value to that. It's so that we get it right, hopefully. You know, and still we get things that go through sometimes and it goes back for review and they go, you know, you can't do this, that this is out of line, or you've got something in the wrong chapter. And so it is a good process overall.
And just to put because I agree with that wholeheartedly, which is actually why I went to Clean Energy New Hampshire, which is a nonpartisan organization. We have an excellent working relationship, particularly with the Senate Republicans on energy issues. And I would say that what I'm observing is that clean energy is becoming increasingly a pretty nonpartisan issue, particularly at the local level, right? The more local you go in your government agencies, the less likely you are to find people who are super dug in on this issue. And really, the main difference that I find in talking to Democrats and Republicans here in New Hampshire is really just like the focus on what the questions they're asking are. So an example is there was a bill that was one of our priority opposed bills that came to the House yesterday for a public hearing that basically said that if you were a large solar array and you like failed to deliver, right, because the clouds came over and shattered the panels, that you had to provide backup power. And when we read the bill, we're like, this doesn't make any sense. This isn't how energy is governed. You know, the independent system operator deals with this. It's not up to the local utility. And so we were all ready to come out against it. And the prime sponsor came up and he was like, listen, like, I believe that we're going to be powered by 50% local distributed energy resources by 2040. I was just trying to deal with this intermittency question. I realized I kind of got it wrong. This isn't how I should do it, so we should table this bill. And it's just like a really encouraging thing to see, where you just, as people who genuinely are engaging with issues on good faith, sometimes they're coming up with bills that are, we're not in favor of. But that's what you see, I think, in New Hampshire politics. People really are trying to figure stuff out, and they're wrestling with it in a good faith way. It's not like national politics.
So I would say, as a chair, we get bill sponsors that come to us, occasionally with their, before we have the hearing on their bill, and sometimes they'll come in with an amendment because they've realized that geez, you know, I drafted this bill in September, November, whatever our filing period is. It varies depending on the year. And since then, I kind of learned there was a few things, once the language became public prior to the hearing, they have different people that come to them, and they'll be like, geez, I realize there's an error in this. So it's not uncommon for the prime sponsor to come in to introduce the bill at the hearing and bring an amendment with them that can sometimes drastically change the language that's in the bill. So it's a work in progress. That first draft is merely that, just a draft. And as it goes to the committee, just for a little bit on process, once the bill is put in and assigned to a committee, it's no longer the prime sponsor's bill, it's the committee's bill. Now, the prime sponsor's name is still on it, and they come in and introduce the bill, but it's the committee's bill to change and work as they please. And most of the time, and I'd say almost all the time, there's a lot of courtesy given to the prime sponsor and, you know, what their wishes are as far as the direction the bill goes. Sometimes the committee has to go in a different direction. That does happen occasionally. But I've had at least 2 bills this year that we had hearings on where similar to what was discussed, that the prime sponsor came in, introduced the bill, there was testimony given, and immediately after the hearing, the prime sponsor is asking us as a committee, me as the chair, to ITL the bill, inexpedient to legislate, so that the bill doesn't move forward. Because they realized what they brought in didn't do exactly what they wanted. They've missed the mark, and it just isn't something that they want to move forward, because in some cases it actually weakens the statute rather than strengthening it. So those things do occur.
And I think speaking about the legislative process is probably a good segue. Another one of the happy accidents from this week is that the Senate voted on offshore wind. So I assume it's going to be STE, but I'm sure that'll wind up in one of your committees in the
I'm
coming
a
weeks.
co-sponsor on that.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm everywhere. Yeah,
Can
I'm a
you tell us
co-sponsor on
about
that
what's
bill.
to come?
Yeah, well, that bill actually is what we call enabling legislation.
Yep.
So the design of the bill is basically to set New Hampshire up in order to participate properly. So it basically outlines how the Public Utilities Commission is to interact in the process of any agreements that we enter into as a state. And you know, it outlines the various agencies that will participate in CERC, which is a Clean Energy Resource Council. So, so the idea behind it really is to just enable New Hampshire to have the infrastructure in order to move forward with the plans. And I think the head of business development for the state has been involved for a while on behalf of the state in the talks with Maine and with Mass. And so there have been ongoing conversations, but it hasn't been formalized because we didn't have a Department of Energy until just recently. And so there wasn't really, the only point person was Taylor Caswell. He was the only person that had been involved. So our committee was unfortunately left out of, you know, we were kind of mushrooms, you know, a little bit of in the shadows here. But yeah, I know Taylor, he lives in Hollis, so, you know, so I knew a little bit about what was going on, but it hasn't been made public yet. So these guys may know more than I do about it. You're shaking your head, Sam, so.
Well, I mean, what I'd say generally, the offshore wind example is a really interesting case, and I harp on this. So forgive me if this is maybe like not interesting to anybody else, but I think it's really important to harp on it a little bit. The whole market paradigm for how electricity is generated and sold in the United States, but in New England in particular, is really based on a series of assumptions of what the technologies that were available were, right? It's centralized generation, transmission out to distribution to homes. And so this hub and spoke model. And now, increasingly, you know, if you've looked at the cost curves for how much solar power costs these days, a utility scale solar plant in the sunniest place of the world is literally the cheapest electricity, the cheapest energy in human existence. I mean, it's off the walls how fast the prices have dropped, which is just radically reshaping how we're gonna build out the grid in the future. And the markets aren't designed for it, right? So they're designed for projects that cost a certain amount of capital to build, and then you have to buy fuel, and so they have a lot of marginal costs, and that's what the markets are designed for. Versus renewable projects cost a ton of capital to build, but have zero marginal costs. And so, to a certain extent, renewable energy kind of like breaks the markets. And like you'll hear, if you talk to the generators that own fossil fuel power plants, they complain about this all the time. They're like, the renewables are depressing the prices, and they're, you know, it's like, okay, like cheap power is a problem for who exactly? But really what's going on is the markets weren't designed for the energy paradigm that we're headed into. And so with offshore wind, how states have gotten around that is they build like a market on top of the market where they have a competitive auction process where they buy a certain amount of offshore wind from these projects as they're getting built in an auction, which is also a market, right? But it's a market that's designed for capital-intensive projects. But that then causes problems because we've got like markets on top of markets, and you know. So I harp on this mostly to say that Clean Energy New Hampshire, our standpoint is generally that energy should compete, but it should compete in markets that are designed sensibly, and so I would love to work with Republicans who want to work on market reform so these technologies are competing on a playing field that makes sense.
And so that's one thing we can look for in STE. Representative Pearl, what's coming down the pipe in your committee?
So as I said in my opening statement, we had an awful lot of solid waste related bills this year that came in, and many of them were related to the topic of siting of landfills, because that is a hot topic right now. As John is here for, there's one in, I'll include you in this conversation too, sorry.
I appreciate that.
You know, he's certainly been advocating about a particular project that's going on or proposed to go on in Dalton. And so it's brought to light the concerns around the siting of landfill, and the legislature has not looked at the rules for the siting of landfill. I'm trying to think of how to do this without boring you all to death. So it's within the purview of our committee to look at the rules relating to anything environmental like that. And when you get a project like this where there's a lot of advocacy around it, sometimes it shows you that there's an area of statute maybe that hasn't been looked at, and maybe you need to, because as we go through and we change as society, what we look at as acceptable changes at times, and we get new technology, we get new information, we're learning as we go. We all are. And so what we will accept sometimes may have changed and needs to be updated from what is currently in statute. So again, I talked about the slow process of government. It is, and it should be. It's what we do, what Kat and I do every day, is we have to look at language that comes in and understand how it's going to impact all of you, all of the state of New Hampshire, and sometimes even beyond that. And so we want to make sure we're doing a good job of that, and we're being thorough in what we do. So we had several bills that came in looking to discuss individual parts of the siting of landfill. There's quite a set of rules and regulations that go along, as there should be. It's a very important public benefit project when we do a landfill. Many years back, and I'm a little thin on the date, but I believe it was in the late 70s and into the 80s, you had a lot of community-owned landfills, like almost every town had one. And we moved away from that as a policy of the state to more centralized landfills, these larger ones, where we felt we could manage them better, and they could be, we could take care of the leachate and issues that were occurring in these small community-owned landfills. So that was a policy shift. Well, now we're looking at that again. We've realized it's been 20 plus years since these rules in the siting criteria have really been looked at, and the legislature, the members of my committee, especially after all the things that have come to light related to the Dalton landfill, and again, it's advocates like John and his group that bring these things to light, and it's an important part of our process. And so we decided that we better look at these landfill criteria, and there were many bills introduced in that same area. So what we've done is we've combined a lot of them into one study committee, because there was several different proposals, and we thought, a lot of these really fall under the same general area of the statute and under the same area where we need to be looking at. So the committee has consolidated 5 bills into one. I believe it's 5, sorry. And we've also put out one or two other study committees that those topics were a little bit different and didn't feel like they belonged all in the same group. So that's kind of what's been happening in ENA as far as the biggest part of it. Again, we have some other smaller related bills to animal cruelty and things of that nature, but really our focus has been on solid waste.
So now we've heard about a couple of pieces of legislation as well as some complicated administrative procedures going on. John, you are now well known in the environmental policy community just by lifting yourself up as an activist. What can we do now that we know about these pieces of legislation? How can we, try to build support for what we care about?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Citizen participation has been so crucial to our effort. And again, it's personally, I feel the Dalton project is going to be defeated based on the merits of the proposal. They withdrew their wetlands permit application. There's nothing really current going on with it. And we're just hoping that calmer, minds have come to the table and said, this isn't a good location for a landfill of this size in this location. So, I mean, many of you are probably in New Hampshire because of your love for the outdoors, the natural environment. That's what draws tourists. Tourism industry had a record year this past summer. So I would recommend that you focus on environmental law going forward, because this state, as Chairman Pearl has mentioned, solid waste policy, others, including emerging threat of PFAS, all related. And there's a reason, like St. Gobain, they chose New Hampshire over Vermont because of our lack of regulatory policies. So, that's an area where I would recommend you start to look at in terms of how you can protect that which drew you to New Hampshire. Because the battlefield is in the courts. The attorneys are the warriors who are fighting it out with these companies, whether it's solid waste, landfills, or companies that 3M that manufacture PFAS content. In terms of our bills, I would just say we've got several that I think are very important. One is House Bill 1420, which came out of Chairman Pearl's committee as ought to pass as amended, 17-0. So, I mean, it's very heartening to see the amount of legislation that's now focusing on environmental issues. Producer responsibility for their packaging and whatnot. I mean, recycling of construction debris, food waste diversion from landfills. I mean, these are all really important topics. And I would just say, if anything, you can visit my site, Save Forest Lake. I'm on Facebook. We always put out notices about what pieces of legislation are coming out. We've created a spreadsheet. You can contact me. But I would really recommend that you take the time and visit one of these committees. And Chairman Pearl's ENA committee is a great committee because they seem to work well together. They seem to respect each other. And they are, getting the bulk of the environmentally related bills. So, that's one to follow because you haven't really exec'd too many.
We're almost done, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, we exec. The term exec, it's when we give a final committee recommendation for the bill, how the committee feels that it should go, and that recommendation goes to the House floor for the full House to vote on. That's the last step a committee does with the bill, is exec it, and that formally moves that recommendation forward. Yeah, we've exec'd all but two bills.
Okay. So we've got 1454 before them that's still in work session.
Yep.
That's a very important bill in terms of the proper siting and safe siting of landfills, because currently, get this, the statute, the RSA is for siting a landfill from a body of water, it's a 200-foot setback. I mean, what is that, Talk about an arbitrary number. So we actually have scientists that we're working with who were involved with OSHA, EPA, et cetera, and House Bill 1454 is still being looked at by the committee, but it's proposing proper siting and evaluation of a site at the very beginning of the process, so you don't have to spend 3 years of your time like I have fighting a project that's in a bad location. So it saves DES time and money. It saves the developer time and money, because all it is, they do it in the beginning, they dig test wells, and they evaluate the speed of the groundwater flow. And so we've taken a 5-year goal or measure of groundwater capacity to determine if a site is proper for a landfill. At 5 years means how fast the groundwater flows from a body of water. So from the landfill to a body of water, if that contaminant can get there in less than 5 years, based on the groundwater flow at that test well, it's not a proper site, and DES can deny the application. It so saves everybody time. So House Bill 1454, I would recommend you follow. And in the Senate next week, it's going to be a very good hearing, SB 380, introduced by our senator, sponsored by our Senator Aaron Hennessy. And that also has a lot to do with the siting of landfills, as well as looking at solid waste policy and out-of-state trash. That's, I don't know if you're aware of this, but 50% of what's landfilled in New Hampshire comes from out of state. So I would also recommend that you look at the recent Interstate Commerce Clause opinion put out by the New Hampshire Attorney General. It's fascinating, and I think it makes the case for a future state-owned landfill when it's needed. Because right now we don't really need a new landfill in New Hampshire from New Hampshire waste. We just have a problem with out-of-state companies bringing in out-of-state waste and filling up our capacity. So that's the real rub of it all.
So John has touched on a really good topic here, a couple of them actually. The Interstate Commerce Clause is something that's very challenging when it comes to solid waste, as well as it is, it's there to protect, obviously, so that states basically can't monopolize on business prevent other businesses from doing other states from doing business within their state. But it does come with its challenges too, because this is where you run into state and federal jurisdictions, so to speak. And so that's one that we're looking at. Part of that House Bill 1049, which is the one we ended up using as a vehicle for the study committee, we've included parts of House Bill 1454, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, there's so many of them. You might not be mixed up sometimes. We've included aspects of that because we do feel that the water flow is a good part, a really good measure potentially of how the committee did, of where a landfill should be sited. So we've included a piece of that bill in the study committee bill. And as I said, we combined a whole bunch of them together because they really kind of are all going in the same direction about the siting of landfills. So one of the challenges that we have to look at as a public policy body is, John talked about, that distance of how water travels. Well, the problem is sometimes the landfill may be on one owner's land, but the land between that and the river or the body of water where it may flow to, someone else owns. So we always have to consider private property rights as we're looking at these, because you really get into a lot of interesting challenges as you look at developing a policy that's going to impact everyone. It's a good public benefit to have a landfill, correct? We all agree that. We have to have them. They should be sited in the right place. But they might potentially impact the neighbor's land in some way. So all of these things are things we have to look at, and it becomes a challenge, and that's why sometimes it seems incredibly frustrating, I'm sure, to watch us work through the policy that needs to be discussed, and you're literally picking these bills apart, and you've got the members, there's 19 members on my committee, and they're all looking at it from 19 different viewpoints, as well as all of the folks that come in and advocate and testify, and they're really our lifeblood, because we get paid $100 a year. We don't have staff. We do this on our own. It's basically a volunteer position. You spend a lot of hours. I know Kat touched on this in the beginning. It can be a 3-hour-a-week job, or it can be a 43-hour-a-week job, depending, or more, depending on how much you want to put into it and how involved you want to be as a legislator. So I would say to all of you, as you proceed forward in your adult lives, think about being involved not only as an advocate, but as a legislator as you go through this. You'll find that that's how I started. I used to sit and testify on ag policy, things that related to my farm. It was important to me because they'd have these bills that come forward. I started very much the same way John did, sitting in here and testifying, trying to convince the person behind that table in the committee room. I decided that maybe I could do a better job if I was the person behind that table.
Me too.
And that's how we start.
Yeah.
Well, and then I went from there to moving up, and the second term we as Republicans were in the minority, so I moved up to ranking member of the committee, and what that means is you're sort of the ranking member of the minority part of the committee. Well, then, when we became in the majority, I then moved to committee chair. You start to get more and more ability to really affect the policy in the area that you have a passion in your committee. So you can do it. Get involved, be involved. It takes time, it takes a lot of commitment, but you're all obviously here because you care about something and you want to study and you want to learn more and you want to make a difference. So I would encourage you to continue on and do that, and think about sometime in your life being involved in the legislature.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. And not to go too far back, but John, thank you for bringing up PFAS and St. Cobain. I, as a Merrimack native, appreciate that. We're going to remember that. We're a little over time, so if you guys don't mind, does anybody have any questions? That might be the easiest ever.
Attorneys without questions.
There's gonna be some
I think
questions.
that's a first.
They're
We either put them to,
formulating.
They
yeah,
have a
we
lot
either put them to
of
sleep.
Yeah,
that's
kidding.
There's a lot of homework.
We either did a very thorough job or put them to sleep, one or the other.
You all touched on like how unique New Hampshire is, whether it's like legislatively or politically. Is there anything, or I know Nick, you touched on like infrastructure, and I mentioned like local stuff. Like, are there any other areas where you think like the specific projects you mentioned or environmentalism in general really touches on that you think would resonate more with people in New Hampshire than elsewhere?
Oh, that's a tough question.
I grew up here. I would say that there's still a very strong sort of like bipartisan concern with natural resource protection generally in New Hampshire, and I think that is true nationwide. But you know, certainly the politics of New Hampshire are not like the land politics of the West, like from what I've read about it. And like land trusts here, the land trust movement is still quite strong, and is
Yeah.
very, very bipartisan, right? But I think, you know, generally speaking, New Hampshire is a place that people come to because of the natural resources, and so I think, you know, you see a lot of bipartisan consensus on trying to protect those resources.
So like the literal land is where you say like there's a lot of common ground
Yeah.
and passion. Okay.
Well, you know, protecting our bodies of water. I mean,
Yeah.
water and air quality are just, and your children deserve to enjoy what we're enjoying right now. You know, it's still a great place to live and visit, and I think what we all want is to leave this place in a better position for you and your kids, and that's what we're fighting for.
Well, in open space too. There's a lot of land conservation. It's becoming more and more, and we're always looking for. I think of the right way to say this without stepping on anybody. We're always looking, obviously, as younger people moving into your adult life, you need a home, you need someplace to live. But development in communities sometimes presents challenges. It's in conflict with open space at times. So a lot of New Hampshire, what it has to offer is that beauty of open space. That's why people come here. We're a real tourist attraction. And so looking at development in planning and zoning regulations is real important to try and balance that. Obviously, we all need homes. You know, we need people to be here, and if our economy is going to thrive and grow, we have to have workers. So finding that balance is a really interesting topic. I sat on the zoning board in my town for 13 years and got exposed to a lot of it. And so that's also another challenge.
I'm on my zoning board too.
All right.
Yeah. Gluttons for punishment. Go ahead.
Just now and a little bit earlier, you mentioned a little local pushback, you know, with some renewable projects, you know, because they do tend to take up more space than more traditional energy production projects that we currently have. Is there a lot of pushback on the offshore wind? Because I know, like, Massachusetts and Cape Cod have been trying for a long time, but, you know, nobody wants to look at it there. There's NIMBY opposition. Is that the same thing here?
The last thing I did before leaving NHPR was a 2-year series on offshore wind, and the pushback to it, which largely
Which I
comes from
strongly recommend as a listener.
it comes largely from the fishing community. So what I would say generally is that, and I was gonna say this, I didn't want to like be a jerk, but like the flip side.
We're all friends now.
Yeah, the flip side to the like, there's a strong bipartisan consensus that protecting our natural resources is great, is that the East Coast generally is like a hotbed of NIMBYism, right? And that's a term that not a lot of people love to hear, and I hope, John, that you do not. I'm sure you've been accused of being a NIMBY. I'm not saying you're a NIMBY. That's not at all what I'm saying. But it's really hard to know, like, what is the difference between a NIMBY versus what is the difference between someone who's got like good faith objections to something being built, and there is no clear way of saying like who is a NIMBY, right? So I tend to not even throw that term out, but I think it bears saying that it's really hard to build anything in New England, and that's true, which is why I personally think that renewable energy is particularly well suited to step into this place, because a lot of it can be just slapped on a roof, right? And not everything, and which is where I actually think that the future of offshore wind is quite bright. And having spent 2 years in this space, the fishing community is very, very opposed to developing offshore wind, but it's a very small community. And I think that with a couple, there are areas that I would say actually do need change in the way that we permit and site offshore wind farms. In fact, Nick's been working on this and should jump in. But largely speaking, I do think that those projects can coexist with commercial fishing. And there's quite a lot of evidence that they can actually be habitat positive because of what's called the reef effect. So, but it's really more of a social problem than a science problem, because folks have got to experience it before they believe it.
I would just add that, I think part of the issue with offshore wind is that, it's so new, so we don't really understand the impacts yet. And so, especially from the fishing community, they think it's just going to destroy their livelihoods and whatnot. And so, with how offshore wind has been permitted so far in southern New England, it's not the best process so far. And one thing we're working on is ways to improve the process and really sort of develop a stakeholder process up front that really tries to sort of look at some of those impacts up front and find a place that kind of reduces impacts for everybody. And so in southern New England, some of the offshore wind farms have been sited like on very productive fishing grounds, and so a lot of fishing communities are very concerned about that. And so you really need to, if you have a stakeholder-driven process that kind of looks at those impacts up front, you can kind of address some of those concerns at the outset without developing problems down the road. So I think there's process improvements that can reduce a lot of those concerns.
And I think there's some mindfulness around that in SB 440, which is Dave Waters' bill. He's from Portsmouth, and he's been involved in a commission that we had looking at offshore wind for a while, because the project that's being proposed is in the Gulf of Maine. And so, there's been a lot of consideration about where it's going to site, and the thought is that likely it will come on shore in his town, in that area. And so, the conversations are ongoing, but I think the fishing community they're considering having, somebody on the CERC, the Clean Energy Resource Council, that represents that constituency. So to Nick's point, having a stakeholder process is the way New Hampshire does a lot of things, because we don't pay for anything, right? So we get people that have interests, and we make them give us their time so that their interests can be represented, which is, it's kind of a cool and close way of doing government. And I just wanted to mention at the beginning of your question, when you started asking about renewables before you went off into the large capital project, which has more interest because, of course, the utilities get a piece of that, so it's an economic stimulus that a lot of business is interested in. Whereas the retail market that's supposed to be diversifying how we're getting energy from multiple sources and not just default service providers, that market has been, less easy for us to prop up, right? We've been trying for a long time to get a net metering policy that provides a reasonable payback for people who are contributing. And so on my committee, of course, we're grappling with that all the time. We have all kinds of bills. The ones that I think are good get killed, So it's been really interesting to watch this evolution because it's a learning process, which is the best thing about being in the legislature is how much you learn. And
the friendships you make.
That's true. That's true.
You really do.
That's true. That's funny. That's the first thing my husband said to me when I decided to run. He said, "You'll learn a lot. You'll meet great people." Right? Because all the great people that are working on stuff, like Sam and Nick and Howard, and John, I know all these people already because of the work that I do. But what's really interesting to me is that what I've learned is government can either facilitate a transition or it can fight it. There's a regional greenhouse gas initiative which we got into, but instead of using the money for energy efficiency as the other states around us and renewable energy, as other states around us are doing, because it ends up being a chunk of change. It's in the millions every year. We rebate it all, and so we don't take advantage of that, right? So we end up being a donut hole in the region in terms of how little we've invested so far, and also how we're less supportive of renewable projects in general. Last year, through much gnashing of teeth, we passed a municipal-only net metering bill.
I was a co-sponsor on it.
I know. Well, he does everything across the aisle. He's one of the good ones, But
did you get that on tape?
Yeah, I did.
well, you're here tonight too. But what we've been trying to do for some time is to get policy that provides that credit for other people who are producing between 1 megawatt and up to 5 megawatts, which is the federal, the FERC cutoff. And so without that policy, it's just like what we talked about with the energy efficiency policy in the beginning. When you destabilize and people don't know whether they should invest or if they can invest or what they can rely on, when you remove that stability of the policy that people can count on, and if you go one step forward, 2 steps back, people will not invest in the way. So we haven't been able to get the market to a place where it's actually stable and cooking. Right? People are not playing in this market because they don't see it as a viable market, and so that's been a real tug of war, sort of, in the legislature around what philosophy we should adopt as a state. The last thing I'll say is, when I first started looking at our energy policy, we used to have a portfolio pie that you could look at, so you could see, how much of our energy was coming from various sources. Very helpful for me. I'm a big picture person, so I like the visual. And then sort of where you have to make your marks, or where your policy will do the most good, I guess, is the way you would look at it. And it depends on what your goals are, if it's lowering emissions. And so there's another regional initiative which has recently been, I guess, people have decided they're not going to go as fast as they were with the TCI, the Transportation Climate Initiative. But in the region, electric generation was something we attacked to lower emissions, and we succeeded. We did a good job with that. And the next big segment, like 44% of our emissions in the state, is from transportation. And so, but we decided not to get into that regional bit. So we don't have a plan, and I think that is the thing, that is concerning to me, because I think as a state, I think energy is a big enough part of our economic sector that we should really be trying to figure out what our plan is for all of those pieces that matter. Because it's not something you can just turn on and turn off. It is something that you need to have, 10-year strategy for, which they say is coming. Right?
Allegedly a new strategy on its way.
Yeah.
Was this come out like a year ago? Last spring?
It's been a hard year.
Yeah, it was a hard year.
So I want to add one more piece to sort of along what you were asking. There's competition, as was discussed, for the fishermen, with the waters, and because they're using them and they've used them right along. The other one we're seeing is in these large-scale solar projects, because the easiest land and easiest place to build these, you obviously don't want shadows on them. You want a wide open sun, so it's the prime agricultural land becomes the target of many of these facilities because of just the fact that it's open, it's flat. The soils are generally easy to work with, And so that's another thing that we have to look at as a state, is balancing that policy, because obviously you all want to eat, you know, and having a local food market and local food security is really important as a state policy. But we have to balance that with the use of the land. There's only so much land out there. 80+% of New Hampshire is forest. So we have a very small amount of open land. So that open land becomes very attractive, again, to housing, to these large-scale solar projects, simply because often at the time it's just the location of it is prime for it. Yet agriculture needs to survive. You all need us to be here. You all want to eat. But many times that's not the highest value use of the land. So that is one of the things that I'm always looking for, is, you know, getting some of these conservation easements in place to protect some of the valuable parts of the land. I'm actually working on getting one in place on my farm. But I'm going to tell you, it is a long process to do it. Very long. I started 10 years ago. And in real earnest, have been in it for more than 3 years, just once I got things underway. So again, these are things that we all have to look at. Renewable projects are great. Renewable energy has a place, but we have to balance that alongside of, you know, the use of the land for agriculture, the use of the land for fishing. All of these things have to come into play. Conservation of our forest lands as well. If we push all these solar projects into forested land, well, that would mean we'd have to do a lot of forest harvest, which would open the land up, and that would, again, start changing the way things are. So it's never as easy as it looks, and while sometimes, you know, Kat and I may have a different opinion on, Reggie would be one of them, in the use of the money, it's fine. It's great to have all of these opinions around the same table, have this conversation, and from that, hopefully, we're going to find a middle ground, and we're going to move forward with a policy that kind of hits and does the best thing for the state. I always feel like I have found the middle when no one's happy with me. Then I feel like I've got there.
Does anybody have maybe one or two more to send us off? Then I'll just say, we're all here studying to practice the law. Nick, what's it like practicing in New Hampshire really quick, and what can we do as students to be on the path for environmental law?
I mean, I guess one thing I would say is, you know, the first job out of law school is not going to be, you know, your last job. And, you know, just because if you don't like your first job out of law school, that, you know, don't think that being a lawyer is going to be bad, because, you know, I think my path to sort of environmental law, to where I work at the Conservation Law Foundation, has certainly not been linear. So, you know, I would just say, you know, keep your options open, and, you know, if your first job isn't what you like or what you want to do, just, you know, keep working towards that goal, because, you know, I think eventually you'll reach that job you're looking for, the law you want to practice. And so, you know, in New Hampshire, we have a lot of environmental organizations like CLF that are active and have lawyers, but, you know, especially in New England, you know, there's a large, you know, a lot of organizations like Conservation Law Foundation that are doing similar environmental work, environmental law work. So, you know, I would just say, you know, keep your options open, and, you know, you'll get the jobs you want.
Sam, how's the cross-country skiing in the Olympics so far?
Well, it's all man-made snow, and apparently they have to get out the leaf blower to get the dirt out of the snow, because it like blows in off the desert nearby. So it's a little bananas. And the other thing I would comment on, so Jesse Diggins did get a bronze, first individual medal in a long time. But the other thing I'd say is, look at the finish line. They've got this like trench that they dug across the finish line, and they hit it, and it's like so I could talk about cross-country skiing for the rest of the night. I gotta go help with bedtime with the kids.
So thank you all very much for coming. We hope to, you know, see all of you again and keep in contact, and we do really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.